How are you doing tonight? My name is Dina Cataldo, and I am the owner of Sicilian Tea Company, and I am here with you tonight, this Tuesday, to talk to you about tea. I hope you're doing all right tonight. I know there's a lot going on in the country, and there are a lot of people right now who don't even have access to electricity. So I hope you're in a place where you're safe and where you don't have to worry about these things, and that you are able to contribute in some way to help others. I know that the Red Cross has a very easy way to donate online. So the Red Cross is always my go-to when it comes to disaster relief, and this would be no exception. This would be a great time if you could just give $10 to help other people in need. So I hope you're well. Now I'm going to get into our regularly scheduled program, and that is to start off with some tea trivia. I'm going to talk about how tea should taste, but first I want to ask you this. All right, there we go. So, did you know that tea is grown in Africa? And there are a few spots in Africa where it is produced the most, where it's exported the most, and I wanted to know if you know which areas of Africa they are. I'm going to give you 4 choices. So it's going to be 2 of them, and at the end of the show I'm going to tell you which 2 they are. So you could choose from Zimbabwe, Kenya, Malawi, or South Africa. So tell me which one you think it is, or which 2 you think it is. And this is my lovely cat, Rocco, who likes to kind of join in, but this is my comfy spot in my home, so he's welcome to it, and you are too. All right, so let's get to how your tea should taste. So there are 6 questions that I've come up with that can help you, can kind of guide you into deciding whether or not your tea tastes right. I didn't ask myself whether my tea tasted right when I first started drinking it, because I didn't think anything of it. I figured how I was drinking it was the way that it should taste. I grew up drinking tea bags, and it's usually Lipton tea bags, maybe some celestial seasonings thrown in there for some herbal drinks, but it was just a lot of black tea. I assumed that the way my mom taught me how to drink tea was the only way to drink tea. Her mom taught her to drink tea that way too. There really wasn't any room in my mind to even question that my tea didn't taste quite right until I started doing some research. And I didn't start doing research until I had a health scare, and I was trying to tweak things in my life, like try to create some easy tweaks in my life to be healthier. Things that I did all the time, like drinking tea, I wanted to see if I could somehow make that a little bit more of a healthier ritual in my life. And when I started doing that research, I started discovering that how my tea tasted could be a lot better. And I mean, why not try to make your ritual better, right? If you like something and you discover that there's a way that you can enjoy it even more, why not learn how to enjoy it even more, especially when it's something that is super easy, like changing a few things in your tea ritual. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my own discoveries, and hopefully you will take a few moments the next time you sip tea to think about, can your tea taste better? Because when I think back on my tea experiences before I started drinking loose leaf tea, which would have been about 7 years ago now, I'm kind of grossed out. I'm kind of grossed out at the kind of tea that I used to drink. So it's something to think about if you are doing a tea ritual already, if you're using tea bags already, or even if you're drinking loose leaf tea. These are some questions that you may want to ask yourself to see if your tea tastes as good as it could. So let's get some things straight here off the bat. So we're talking about actual tea. So tea all comes from the same plant. It's called Camellia sinensis, and that is a particular tea plant. We're not talking about herbal blends or tisanes. We're not talking about tea blends that mix teas with herbs and spices. We're talking about straight up tea leaf, all right? And there's quite a bit of a difference, but the first big one is that tea has caffeine and herbal blends do not have caffeine, except for yerba mate and guarana. Those are the only two exceptions when it comes to herbs. They have caffeine. And then there might be another one. If you know of another one, let me know. And then tea blends have caffeine, obviously, because they have tea, and then they're mixed in with some sort of spice or herb. So let's get that first part out of the way. And then I wanted to tell you a little bit about what you could be doing better with these 6 questions. So let me start off with just number 1, okay? And the first one is ask yourself, are you sipping loose leaf teas or are you drinking out of tea bags? And there's no judgment here. I just want to bring some awareness to what you might be drinking so that you can discover for yourself what you may like best. So what I was drinking before I started drinking loose leaf tea were the tea dust in tea bags. And they're those tea dust that I'm talking about are also called fannings, and they're the tiny tea particles that you see when you open up a tea bag. And most of those traditional tea bags, when you open them up, that's what you see, right? Those little granules. And the little granules are, here's Rocco again, those little granules are they're oxidized. They're fully oxidized. And what that means is that they have been crushed and torn and curled into tiny bits, and the oxygen has absorbed the healthy oils from the tea bits. Okay, and when you oxidize anything, when oxygen hits anything, it is going to absorb the moisture, right? When you pluck a tea leaf and you have a whole tea leaf, that's immediately after you pluck it, that's when the oxidation process begins. It's halted in a lot of teas, and it is played with a little bit, like it's halted and it's started again and then it's halted again, and the tea leaves are curled or twisted or rolled in order to change the flavor of the teas, and they're oxidized in those ways. But for the tea particles, they are completely oxidized. They've been torn up into tiny little bits. And it makes sense, right? Like if you want to create a fast and quick and dirty tea that brews in a second, then the more surface area you have around a tea particle, the quicker it's going to brew. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to taste good, but it might brew a little quicker. My experience is, though, if you get a really good quality loose leaf tea, the timing doesn't matter. Like it's just as quick. So at some point down the line, someone decided that the tea particles were a better way to go, and unfortunately that's been passed on. And the tea bits were just an excuse for the manufacturers, the producers, to get rid of the tea that was on the warehouse floors. Like it was literally swept off the warehouse floors and then put into these tea bags, which were also an accident. They were created about 100 years ago by a tea merchant who was trying to sell his tea and put them in little silk pouches, trying to sell his tea, and the people just assumed that the tea bags were meant to be thrown into a teacup. So these were all accidents, and they weren't necessarily good accidents when you come to find out the flavor that you're losing. Because when the tea is totally oxidized, it's taking away all those healthy oils, which isn't just taking away those health benefits, it's also taking away the flavors, like the complex flavors that you're going to be seeing. So for instance, with a black tea, you might have a Lipton tea bag, which I love Lipton, don't get me wrong, I grew up with it, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it's just different. And I discovered that I wanted to do something different when I started learning about what other teas were out there. And I discovered that there were very complex flavors involved with black teas that I was not necessarily getting in the tea bag, like cacao or dark chocolate or the malty flavor. And it was so easy for me to overbrew the tea bags because I would leave them in my cup. So like, for instance, I have my cup of tea here, but I brewed it ahead of time and I took the brewing accessory out, and now I'm sitting with it. But back in the day, I would just leave my tea bag in there. I would be sitting here for 20 minutes talking to you, and I would have just left the tea bag in there, not recognizing that the tea was continuing to cook and that it was creating a very tannic flavor, which was sharp and bitter. I knew that that was the flavor I was getting, but I assumed that that was how my tea was supposed to taste. Does that make sense? So now when I brew my tea, I recognize I do not want to leave my tea in the water because it continues to cook. So if you want to experiment with loose leaf tea, this is something that you want to be aware of, is that there are more complex flavors available to you when you try loose leaf tea, and it's healthier. So let's talk about the other oh, and there's another thing that I don't think a lot of people talk about, and I experienced this when I would drink tea bags, is I would overbrew the tea, and then I would get what I call tea tummy, because my stomach would hurt and I couldn't figure out what it was. So if you're drinking tea bags and your stomach hurts, consider that it's not the tea. It's most likely that you're eating on an empty, or you're drinking it on an empty stomach, or you're taking your tea while you're also taking your medications or your vitamins. So just be aware of that. I've had that issue come up, and I know people have asked me about it. So it's not that the tea is bad. It's really hard for tea to go bad. I mean, it doesn't taste great sometimes when it gets stale, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it's not necessarily going to make you sick. All right, so keep that in mind. So the second question you want to ask yourself when you're drinking your tea is, what kind of tea are you drinking? What type of tea are you drinking? There are 6 types of teas: white, green, yellow, oolong, black, and dark. 6. And within each of those types of teas are different varieties. So no 2 green teas are alike, no 2 white teas are alike, and you're going to notice different characteristics for each tea. And you probably recognize this if you've drunk any tea at all, is that green teas taste different than black teas. So green teas, maybe you've had some that are kind of seaweed-like. I know I have some people who don't like that flavor, and I've experienced that mostly with the fully oxidized green tea, the tea bag tea, rather than the loose leaf tea, but that's been people's experiences. And then you compare that to a black tea, which is a richer, maltier flavor. They're very different. So each tea is going to taste unique. When you're drinking those teas, think about what kind of flavors you should be getting. Now, because each variety within those types of teas is different, you're also going to get different characteristics. So maybe a white tea that you have will be buttery, another one will be nutty, another one will be floral. So if you can get a good aroma, like a good bouquet from the liquor that you've brewed, then chances are it's a good tea. Now, we'll talk a little bit later about what if it doesn't have a very strong aroma or flavor. One, you may want to brew it a little bit longer and see if that gives you more flavor. The other thing that could be the problem is that it's stale, but you just kind of have to consider how long have you had the tea, what kind of tea are you drinking, how have you brewed the tea. So let's break it down, right? So white teas, what you're looking for is it's usually a delicate aroma, buttery, nutty, hay, like it's a sweet hay. Sometimes you get honeyed flavors in there. Green teas, you're looking for anything from seaweed to freshly cut grass. Some are sweeter, some are more savory. Yellow teas, which we don't see a lot, but I'm going to have one in my 14-day tea tour, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that at the very end. That has some sweet hay flavors to it. You're going to get in oolongs a great variety of different flavors, ranging from like the green end of oolongs all the way to the dark ends of oolongs, because there are so many varieties of them. So you may have oolongs that have more of a honeyed flavor or more of a grassy or hay flavor, all the way through like milk oolongs to roasted oolongs. You get some cacao notes, you get some dark chocolate notes, you get a range of different flavors. But what's important is that you can actually name those flavors. You can actually smell them, and you can really tell the difference when you put these loose leaf teas, the quality loose leaf teas, side by side with the tea bag tea that has tea dust in it. And then you have your black teas. So your black teas are going to be malty or floral, or also have cacao notes or dark chocolate. They're going to be rich and flavorful, sometimes floral, like Darjeelings. They're considered a black tea and they are floral. And then when you get into dark teas like Pu'ers, that might be the one that you know, that is much more earthy, and some people say it tastes like soil. It's a very grounded type of tea. So you want to be able to tell those differences, and you don't always get the nuances in tea bag tea that you can get with all the loose leaf teas that we're talking about. So when you're brewing these teas, they're all going to brew just a little bit differently, but I've got a quick little note for you. So when you're looking at loose leaf tea, and you can see them in the palm of your hand, if they're lighter, meaning green or colorful, then you'll boil your water and you'll walk away for 5 minutes, and then you'll pour the water over the leaf. Super simple. If it's dark, if you've got black tea, then you're going to boil your tea and you're going to brew it in that. Start off brewing it for maybe a minute and a half, and then see how you like it. And if you don't get the flavors, you don't get the aromas as strongly as you think they should be, then continue to brew it for 30 seconds at a time. So brew up to 2 minutes, 30 seconds, and see where you're at. If it's a really quality tea, you really should start at like that minute 30 seconds to see if you're getting those aromas. So that's just to give you some easy guidelines if you're just starting out with loose leaf tea. You can go to the website and you can get those guidelines down for you if you go to SicilianTeaCompany.com and go to resources. And I have a bunch of different resources on how to brew the perfect cup of tea, how to brew in a teapot, and how to make iced tea too, cold brewing the tea. So don't forget that you have that as a resource if you ever want to get any more knowledge about how to brew tea. All right, so question number 3. Does your tea have an unexpected flavor? So have you ever brewed tea and maybe you get kind of like this cinnamon taste, and you've never had that cinnamon taste before, and you're wondering where the heck did that come from? It may be because you're storing it with your spices. So you don't want to store your tea with spices or strongly scented foods or even other strongly scented teas, because tea absorbs the flavors of those strongly scented items that are next to it. So be really careful about where you store your items, or where you store your tea. You don't want to store your tea in a spice cabinet, and I used to do that. Now I have my teas are all put into a cabinet unto themselves with my mugs and my teacups and my glasses, and then I don't have to worry about any of that, and I have them all stored in canisters. And I will give you some storage tips at the very end to get you going on your tea collection. All right. Question number 4. Does your tea taste metallic? So if your tea's been around for a while and you sip it and it tastes a little metallic, then you might have stale tea on your hands. All right. Also, if your tea isn't as strong as it used to be, it kind of has like a weak taste to it, chances are it's stale. The way to avoid this is just not to buy a lot of tea. You want to buy it in really small packages, small quantities, and don't unless you know you're going to drink that tea in large quantities, like you know you love that tea, don't purchase it in large quantities. And I talk to a lot of people who say, you know, my tea cabinet's full. I mean, I'm one of those people. My cabinet is full of tea, but I drink crazy amounts of tea. And even though I drink crazy amounts of tea, I still can't get through it all, and I like to buy more of it. So just be aware you don't have to buy every new fancy thing, and just start off in small packages, and then find out what you like. And then when you find out what you like, you don't even have to worry about, you know, looking for the next thing, right? Okay, so question number 5. Well, we already talked about this one, because if your stomach hurts and you're drinking tea, it doesn't necessarily mean that your tea is, you know, it tastes wrong, or that there's something wrong with the tea. It may just mean that you haven't eaten when you drink your tea, and you haven't, sorry, I've got little Rocco here cleaning himself next to me. And it's kind of distracting. I'm sorry. So if you've got, if you have not had anything to eat, or if you've had like your medications or your vitamins with your tea, then that may be what's causing the discomfort. And question number 6. All right. Did you store your refrigerator in your tea? Did you store your tea in your refrigerator? So you don't want to store your tea in the refrigerator, because tea absorbs moisture. It's just like baking soda. It absorbs all the moisture, and tea's supposed to be dry. In fact, it's dried the way that it is, to the percentage that it is, so that way it transports really well, and it stores really well in our kitchen. But when we leave our tea in the refrigerator, or when we store it somewhere where there's a lot of moisture, like over the dishwasher or near a stove where we're cooking food a lot, then the tea takes on that moisture. The way you can tell that the tea has taken on moisture is if the leaves start to get clumpy, or if, you know, when you smell the tea in the canister, that it seems a little bit moldy. So you want to get rid of that tea. It's not going to taste good. That's just something that you want to avoid. All right. So tips to keep your tea fresher longer. Okay, first off, we've talked about store it in a cool, dry place. You want to make sure that it's stored in an opaque container, like a tin. You don't want it in glass or where sun is going to reach the leaves, because heat and moisture, those are enemies to tea, okay? You do not want to have those near tea. It changes the flavor of them. You want to have the container be sealed, and you want to keep the tea away from spices or strongly scented foods. And you want to buy in small amounts, so that way you don't have to worry about whether or not you like it or not. You try it, you don't like it, you can get rid of it, because life's too short for tea you don't like, okay? I stopped drinking bad tea a long time ago. If I have a cup of tea and I don't like it, I just pour it out. I don't continue to drink it, and I get rid of the rest of it, because I don't want to drink bad tea anymore. As simple as that. All right, so we have gone through the 6 questions to ask yourself the next time you sip. Now I want to ask you some questions. I want to find out what kind of tea you've been drinking, and whether or not you think your tea tastes right. Do you have a tea that you don't think tastes quite right? Let me know. Okay, let's figure it out. I had a question today from Carrie, and Carrie was telling me that she's trying to make a ginger tea, and I'm waiting for details to figure out exactly what she's trying to do with the ginger tea, but she knows that it doesn't taste quite right, and she's experimenting. And that's really what you have to do. You have to experiment. You're experimenting with tea, with multiple different types of green tea. What tastes right to you? What do you like? What do you enjoy best? Are you looking for something that is a stronger flavor, then brew it longer, or decide you don't like the tea that you're brewing and get rid of it and get something else? Those are the things to be aware of, is does it taste right to you? And if not, what can you do to improve the taste of it? If it's a weak tea, will brewing it a little bit longer help it taste stronger to you? Or does it just make it taste bitter? Like, that's what would happen to me, is I would be brewing tea too long and it would taste bitter. And I didn't even recognize that it tasted bitter. I just assumed this is how tea was supposed to taste. It's not supposed to taste bitter. It is supposed to be enjoyable, not something that we guzzle down, although I've done that before, but something that we can appreciate, just like we would appreciate wine or a really good beer or anything like that. Tea is meant to be enjoyed. Okay, so trivia. All right. So my question to you at the beginning of this program was, where in Africa, 2 countries, do they produce tea? And the options I gave you were Zimbabwe, Malawi, Kenya, and South Africa. And which 2 of those countries that I listed were the tea producing countries in Africa? So if you didn't guess it, the 2 are Kenya and Malawi. They are 2 of the, I think they're the only 2 producers of tea in Africa. South Africa produces red rooibos and a honeybush. They call it tea, but it's not actually tea. They're actually plants that are indigenous to South Africa, but they are herbals. They are not tea. Now, the 14-day tea tour that's coming out in October that I am creating for you has a tea from Malawi. It's a white tea, and I'm really excited about it. If you want to learn more about it, if you want to ask me any questions about it, please go to the website. I have posted a link on this page, and you can also reach it by going to SicilianTeaCompany.com and hitting shop. And it's the first item that you see there is the 14-day tea tour. So you can check it out for yourself. If you want to look into it, you're going to want to be the first person to get info on this. You're going to want to be on the list because I've only made 200 of them. And they're going to be in limited supply. I am going to create some special bonuses, some special tea bonuses to go along with the packages that the very first people buy. And it's going to only be a 2-week run. Okay, so I'll give you more information on that, but go to the list, sign up, and then you will get more info. So thank you so much for being here tonight, and I hope that you learned something about tea. Maybe you'll experiment a little bit with tea and decide that you want to try something new. I mean, that's the whole reason that I'm doing these videos, is to give you some ideas of what's out there, because I didn't know what was out there. I thought that all tea tasted alike, that whatever I was getting at the grocery store was the best tea that was out there. I never gave it a second thought because that's how I grew up. I just drank what was in front of me. And there's nothing wrong with that, but if you can do something better, if you can learn more, if you can get more enjoyment out of something, why not do it? Why not do it? All right. Thank you so much. Have a great night.